And I rise today, Madam Speaker, to mark last Thursday, the 17th of March, which was National Close the Gap Day. A day for all of us, but particularly for those of us in positions of leadership within government, to reaffirm our commitment to closing the gap in outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and other between them and other Australians. The continued gap in outcomes demonstrates that despite the inherent strengths of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and communities, despite the resilience and determination of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, the harms of colonisation and institutional racism continue to be felt. Close the Gap Day is an opportunity to sharpen our focus on what still needs to be done. The government is guided in this work by two key agreements: the National Agreement on Closing the Gap, which represents a partnership between all Australian governments and the coalition of peak Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations, and the ACT Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Agreement 2019 to 2028, which represents a partnership between the ACT government and the ACT Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elected body. And I'll soon deliver the government's first annual report statement against these agreements, providing key data and tracking our progress against these significant commitments. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, Madam Speaker, hold the cultural knowledge, the lived experience and the ingenuity to help close the gap. They have the answers. Governments must be focused on investing in partnerships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to achieve our shared goals, and our work through these two agreements demonstrates the value of this approach. As an example, both agreements commit the government to supporting the Aboriginal community controlled sector to grow and develop, allowing it to deliver more services which will help close the gap. The government is progressing a number of initiatives which align with this priority, and these include the development of an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander alcohol and other drug residential rehabilitation service, ongoing co-design of the Ngunnawal Bush Healing Farm model of service, the establishment of an evaluation of an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander specific standalone suicide prevention, postvention and aftercare service in the ACT, and development of new purpose-built facility for Googangul and Youth Aboriginal Corporation, and work in the Child and Youth Protection System to support the establishment and expansion of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, and more broadly, to implement the recommendations of the Our Boroughs, Our Way review. This is part of the work across government, which will further be supported by the $20 million Healing and Reconciliation Fund. The fund represents a new way of partnering with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to advance the priorities under the agreements and other identified community priorities. And initial projects identified have included the establishment of a Ngunnawal Language Centre, expanding the Aboriginal Community Controlled sector, restoring Boomanalla Oval and Yarramundi Cultural Centre to community control, and supporting a treaty process. In addition to treaty being a priority for the Healing and Reconciliation Fund, the 2020-21 budget included funding for an independent facilitator to undertake consultation with the community. Due to the impacts of COVID-19, this work has experienced some delays. However, after consultation with the United Ngunnawal Elders Council, Professor Kerry Arabina has now been contracted to consult with the community about the next steps for a treaty process. On Close the Gap Day last week, the Chief Minister and I were privileged to attend a special meeting of the United Ngunnawal Elders Council with Professor Arabina, which marked the commencement of these discussions. It was an honour to sit together with the Ngunnawal traditional owners, the Chief Minister and Professor Arabina in the Marbo Room at the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies to witness the start of this community conversation. I was particularly pleased to hear Professor Arabina's title for this work, Healing Project. We know that the toll of intergenerational trauma weighs heavy on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, and I hold great confidence that Professor Arabina's focus on healing and bringing families together will ensure that this is a process that recognises the burden of trauma and seeks to ease that burden through healing. Treaties are agreements between governments and traditional owners and can include measures that reflect rights and reparation owed because of the ongoing social, economic and cultural impacts of colonisation. This process will take time, and we are still in its early stages. Our government is committed to walking with and being led by traditional owners every step of the way. I look forward to hearing the outcomes of Professor Arabina's work with the community in the coming months and to seeing the community take the next step towards an important act of self-determination and reconciliation.